Good morning, students. Today we are all gathered here to listen to Professor M.D. Nalapat, who is the Director of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, on a very relevant theme. It is about India as the fulcrum of Southern Asia. The concept of Southern Asia is something which is geopolitically extremely significant, and that is what Professor Nalapat will be highlighting to us, and what India's role will be in it. So it is going to be a very interesting lecture, something which is going to be of immense significance, and I am hopeful that all of you will be benefited by this lecture by Professor Nalapat, as always is the case. So I welcome you, sir, once again to the department, and I'm sure that our students are more than curious to know what you want to talk about India as the fulcrum of Southern Asia. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. With your permission, I'll speak from here rather than holding that mic. At least the less you need to do, the better. But I just want to say that for quite some time, I would say some decades, at least 2 decades, it's been my view that South Asia is a limiting factor for India rather than a plus factor. A limiting factor in the sense that, first of all, there's been an effort by different countries, whether it is our neighbors, China, Pakistan, etc., to confine us to the South Asia basket and to make us basically act and react in a manner that gives a large share of our attention to South Asia, which I think, there are various definitions of South Asia. My definition has been a little expansive from the start, and that has included Myanmar and Afghanistan as well. But the traditional definition is the SAARC countries, which is there. But the point is that if you look at the metrics of hard reality, now what is making an impact today in your life, today or tomorrow? The impact, a lot of it is economic. And if you look at the economics of South Asia, and you look at India's trade with South Asia, and you look at India's trade with Southeast Asia, with West Asia, with East Asia, there's really no comparison between them. East Asia, for example, China, Taiwan is growing, South Korea is significant, Japan is significant. It's very, very huge compared to what we are trading in South Asia. Just one of these countries will have more trade with India than we have with the whole of South Asia. So from the economic standpoint, it is basically seeing India in a light far smaller than its economic footprint. Now, one problem in geopolitics is that the success of a country very frequently depends on the ambition of a country. If a country does not have sufficient ambition, then that country will not really want to, do very much and will be satisfied to remain in a much smaller arena or box or whatever you call it. So ambition is also a limiting factor in the development of a country to its potential. If you look at land, for example, you have traditional geopolitics goes into the sea or the land. Whether, you have the initial theories of the geopolitical heartland, Mackinder, you have the theories of Mahan, which are based on sea power. You have land powers that are quite successful. You have, for example, let's say Germany. Germany is much less a sea power than some of the other countries, but today in Europe, Germany is the powerhouse of Europe. It has been for a very, very long time. You look at Japan, you look at the United Kingdom. I mean, the British, it's been interested me for a very long time as to how this tiny little island could take over such a large amount of real estate across the world. If you look at Britain, it's a tiny little island, relatively. You look at Japan, it's another island of not very much size. And if you look at China and Japan at different periods of historical time, then you will see that for several of those periods, Japan was far bigger than China in terms of economy and significance. The Chinese, of course, had a problem in that, they had problems of internal governance, etc. They still have those problems. But, so land is obviously not a limiting factor. And secondly, the problem is in India sometimes we visualize land as a very important factor. I'll give you an example. Let's say you want to develop a smart city or a smart zone in a city as a kind of a high-tech center. Then the problem is in India, a lot of these special economic zones, some of these supposedly, state-of-the-art 21st century zones for development of technology, finance, for example, financial development. You look at a tiny little country called Ireland. I mean, it's a wonderful country, personally. I have, a great granduncle of mine married an Irish lady, and they had a son, Aubrey Menon, who was a writer. It's a wonderful country, wonderful people, but Ireland became a very important financial hub thanks to certain laws it made. And if you look at that financial hub, you'll find about 80% of the activity is concentrated in about 3 or 4 tower blocks in the city of Dublin. You compare that with some other plans that have been laid out in India, for example, of a huge financial city. Now that's literally supposed to mean large in area. So what happens is you have a lot of land, but as of now, it's nowhere near those 3 or 4 tower blocks. So the question is land the limiting factor? It's not. Is land the enabling factor? It's not. Where, you look at New York, for example. What is the land area of New York? You look at, you look at other states in the US, Wyoming, for example, huge amounts of land area. Where is Wyoming compared to New York? Where is, some of the countries in South Asia, I don't want to name them, compared to the city of Mumbai or the city of Bangalore? Nothing, nowhere. Now, Bangalore is not Hong Kong, is another simple example. So the point is that, and if you have this land-based concept of empowerment and success, then what happens is very quickly the project turns into a land bank. It turns into a real estate, a mechanism for, appreciation of real estate values. Then people buy land there, they sell it, they buy again, they sell it, and the expectation that growth is going to come, they set up housing colonies, things like that. It's nothing to do with technology or including financial technology. It then becomes an avenue for speculation in land. So one has to be very careful about looking at what the limiting factors are. And in my case, I've always been skeptical of South Asia as a limiting factor. That's where, when I used to visit the University of Georgia some time ago, decades ago, and give lectures there, you had an excellent department. In fact, we have Dr. Anupam Srivastava and Seema. Both of them are originally from India, brilliant scholars, and they helped to set up a huge amount of interest in the University of Georgia about India. But the difficulty was that the University of Georgia could not go beyond South Asia. And very importantly, could not go beyond India, Pakistan. So almost all the attention that the university was giving, it was a bit frustrating to me especially, because I liked the University of Georgia. I liked its people, I liked its campus, I enjoyed going there and giving lectures there. But for them, maximum, if you look at India, it's South Asia. Beyond South Asia, it's not even relevant. Middle East, not relevant. Southeast Asia, not relevant. This is a time, frankly, when the Middle East was emerging. We're not talking of the past, when before the oil shock caused by, the Yom Kippur War or things like that, when oil prices really shot up and the Middle East started developing a huge amount of reserves and became a huge cash reserve for the world. We're talking even much after that. We're talking of the 1990s. And in the 1990s, in that particular campus, India was South Asia. They would never even talk about India. The studies were all South Asian studies, And in those studies, the focus was on two countries, India and Pakistan. So let's say you have a focus on North Korea and Japan when you look at East Asia. You're not really going to get the picture in either North Korea or Japan. These are, by the way, both countries that I have done a fair amount of looking into. Certainly not North Korea and certainly not Japan. North Korea sees itself in relation to the United States and to China. It does not see itself in relation to Japan. It sees Japan as a card that it can play by whatever, by its own, if I may say so, means that are not entirely pleasant to describe and which personally would find a problem. But Japan for them is that kind of, it's a card to play. It's not the League of China or the United States, specifically the United States. So if you look at North Korea only from the point of view of South Korea and Japan, you lose sight of the broader geopolitical mindset of those who are in charge of North Korea. And may I say one thing about geopolitics? You can go into a country and you can know the language fluently, you can know the people fluently, you can even settle into the local community, you can even marry locally, you can even stay there for long periods of time and basically come back without any understanding of the mindset of those who are in charge of policy. Where geopolitics is concerned, let's be honest, we have a very small catchment area to look at, and that is those who are involved in policy making. And the higher levels, the less and less people there are. So the smaller and smaller that particular population is. So if you look at it from that point of view, you can analyze China unless you know the mind of the Communist Party, from the cadre to the leadership. You're unlikely to be able to understand China. You may speak the language fluently, you may speak the food, you may have gone there multiple times, but you have to understand and think like a Communist Party member, a member of the CCP, a member of the middle ranks of the CCP, a member of the higher ranks of the CCP. It's very difficult to think in terms of the General Secretary of the CCP or the Standing Committee, that level. I think that particular thing is, first of all, one has no access, and secondly, it's an extremely opaque situation. But it is possible to get an idea of, and you have to put yourself in that particular mindset. United States, you can deal with them in a way which is resonant in India, which we understand. But if you don't deal with them in a way that they as Americans and specifically American policymakers understand, your message will cross their heads or go under their radar. It's not going to be understood. It's certainly, if it's not going to be understood, there's a high chance it won't be appreciated, it won't be actioned upon. You're giving messages, tons of messages, somehow the response is not there. Why? Essentially because you have to put yourself in the mindset of the people who run the country that you're dealing with. And that, in some cases, it comes from decades of meeting people, talking to people, dealing informally with them. I'm not sure if you can have a crash course and all that, but that is an essentiality in understanding why policies get framed in the way that they are framed. You're seeing an example. As a result, what happens is you have a disconnect between the policy that is actualized by a country and the predicted policy of a country. The response that is actualized in a country and the predicted response to an action taken by you on the country. So let's say you believe that a particular country will be nervous or go back from certain steps. And on the contrary, that particular country gets more aggravated. It's a surprise to you. You don't understand what's happening. If you do something and then you believe that the reaction in a particular country will one way and becomes a completely opposite reaction, you get surprised. Unfortunately, in many of these cases, what happens is that you, like a good gambler, you keep doubling your bet. You lose this time, all right, I'll put double. I lose that, I'll put double again. And finally, you end up losing a lot of geopolitical oxygen, if I may say so. We have seen world wars are started, not because there was any intention of launching a global conflict. They have lasted for years. They have involved millions of people, millions of deaths. Nobody had any intention of causing those millions of deaths. They were caused as a consequence of misreading the mind of the adversary. And this is something which is very important. So anyway, from that point of view, let me say, in India also, there is, I think there has been a point where today, if you look at your smartphone, you look at the technology of a smartphone. You buy a smartphone and then unfortunately Apple and all these Google and all, they are basically profit-making enterprises. They could have charged maybe much lower prices for what they are selling, but they are charging high prices. I hope someday a time will come when pioneers in India can produce a better smartphone than anything produced in any other part of the world at a tenth of the cost. They are already moving reasonably ahead in a field of energy that was neglected for a very long time. In fact, it got revived about 6 to 7 years ago. It was neglected till then, and that is fusion energy involving thorium. In fact, we gave away our thorium practically at such low prices, mainly to China. If you remember, the monazite sands of Kerala, etc., they were huge. Tamil Nadu, it was given away virtually to countries, and that's extremely valuable. An extremely valuable material. If you look at rare earths, we have all the rare earths that we need. The point is that it's more convenient, apart from the fact that it gets you a return in a Swiss bank, which you don't do if you get it from India. It's more convenient to buy from outside. So over the decades, we lost a lot of that. So there's been a lot of ground to go back to kind of make up for the past errors. But if you look at fusion energy now, we are doing a fast breeder reactor situation. We were, believe it or not, among the pioneers of this fast breeder thing. Among the pioneers of those who tried to unlock fusion energy. We got some absolutely brilliant scientists. For some reason, they were put in a kind of a compartment and said, don't deal with the Indian private sector. Indian private sector was supposed to be a bunch of whatever, crooks or whatever. You can deal with the Western private sector or the global private sector. They are okay, but not with the Indian. I think that is a huge mistake, but it was rectified about 6-7 years ago. And now there's a lot of activity taking place, including in fusion energy, including in the fast breeder reactor thing. And I think you should examine that, because if we succeed in this, you are going to get cheap energy. The whole problem with fossil fuels is the cost. And the whole problem with the cost is not really the availability of fossil fuels. Countries having fossil fuels are in a hurry to get rid of it because they know it's a matter of time before fossil fuels become extinct in use. Not extinct in terms of being there, but extinct in terms of needing to be. Horses, for example. Who's going to use the horses now? And after some time, you're going to stop using any car except cars which are run on battery. You're going to have much simpler, better batteries. The question is geopolitical issues. And the United States, as a large producer of fossil fuel, I mean, they have created problems with Iran oil. They have created problems with Venezuela. They have created problems now with Russia. I'm not going to say that the United States as policymakers have done it for the benefit of the US oil industry. I think, or the food industry or the fertilizer industry. I wouldn't go into that kind of a conspiracy theory. But the impact has been to raise oil prices and therefore set back the global movement from poverty into self-sufficiency. Hundreds of millions of people have suffered because of the effect on fossil fuels of geopolitical factors caused mainly by the United States, and these days where Russia is concerned, its European partners. Almost entirely caused by them. The invasion of Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, all that, personally, it was a predicted war. It was a predictable war. The Russian reaction to what happened in Ukraine in 2014 was also predictable. And may I point out that it was, a revolution from the streets. It was regime change, not from the ballot, but from the streets. Now, just as you can't have a good terrorist and a bad terrorist, you can't have a situation where some street regime change is good and other street regime change is bad, at least to people like me who basically are not very smart. We can't see a difference in that. So Maidan is fantastic. Something that happened in some of the Central Asian republics where there was an effort to change, fantastic. Something that happened in some other locations in the Arab world, fantastic. But, and some horrible. You just can't allow it to happen. And you have to intervene to make sure it doesn't happen. Now, the point is, in a democracy, there's neither the bullet nor the street as the decider of who's going to be in power. It's the ballot. If you swear by democratic values, you are not going to replace the ballot with the bullet or replace the ballot with street power. Unfortunately, there are many democratic countries that find that street power is good and effective, and then that they legitimize that. And in the case of Ukraine, for example, the Russian-speaking population was marginalized. Russian language was completely, virtually eliminated. It reminds me of Sri Lanka in the 1950s, when the Bandaranaike government did almost the same thing, tried to say all Tamils are Indian and they should go back to India. Now, one of the problems I have with Lal Bahadur Shastri, who is a person I admire a lot, hugely one of the best prime ministers. If I'm not mistaken, he had that pact with Sirimavo Bandaranaike, in which a whole lot of Sri Lankan Tamils had to come back to India. What do you mean come back to India? A lot of the Sinhalese are supposed to have gone from Odisha to Sri Lanka. Are they going to come back to Odisha? No, they're there. Are you going to send Americans who have got European ethnicity back to Europe? Of course not. Indian ethnicity back to India? Of course not. So you had that pact, and lakhs of people who are Sri Lankan got uprooted and sent back. And again, I use the word back. It's a reflex action, forgive me, because they would have gone there hundreds of years ago. It's like saying sending back Europeans from the North American continent back to Europe. Using the word back in that kind of a context. It's an absurd context. So, unfortunately, we have had a litany of these kind of actions. One should have been very clear with the Sri Lankan government that these people are your people. And if you want to run Sri Lanka well, you have to take them along with you. Personally, I think that was a mistake, but anyway, it was done. So what I'm trying to say is that the way I looked at things in South Asia, what we call South Asia, the concept of South Asia, India is the one country that's got land borders with, as I can, from my limited geography, with all the South Asian countries. I mean, Afghanistan and Pakistan, thanks to India, and thanks to the problems in Kashmir, etc., and 1/3 of this thing. But otherwise, which countries in South Asia have a land border with any other South Asian country? Very difficult to find that out. India is the lion's share of the economy, the lion's share of the population, the lion's share of the trade. Everything is in this one country. So essentially, a better thing would be India and its neighbors. This is something that I tried very hard to talk to the University of Georgia, my good friends in the University of Georgia. I remember very affectionately Gary Birch, who was the head of the department there, of doing this kind of international studies. A brilliant man, a wonderful human being, a good human being, apart from being a very good, American and a good Democrat. But it was difficult to get them to accept this idea of India and its neighbors when they were stuck on South Asia. So the consequence is what? In the UK, for example, you have people from a particular country stabbing, acts of terror. Everything is South Asian. Oh, a South Asian act of terror, a South Asian stabbing, a South Asian riot. It's not true. I mean, in India, for example, we were partitioned. 75 years ago, a separate country was formed, and that separate country evolved its own mindset. The people of that country are totally different in mindset now after 75 years. You bring up a child in one family, and you bring up a child, a twin of that child in an entirely different family. And I'm told there's a movie, giving that kind of a thing, although it's not going by 75 years. At the end of 75 years, you'll have two entirely different children. I mean, entirely different old people. They won't be the same at all. So, but anything happens there which is done by somebody from Pakistan, somebody from Bangladesh. Sri Lankans are called Sri Lankans. Nepalis are called Nepalis. Bangladeshis are called also, South Asian, frankly, but not so much. They're still called Bangladeshis. But anything that is done by somebody from Pakistan is called South Asian. Like Asian. You have, if you look at CNN, you'll see a lot of thing about hate crime against Asians. It doesn't include India. It doesn't include the Middle East. It may be including ASEAN to some limited extent, but mainly it's about ethnic Chinese. So for these news channels, and that is because, frankly, in scholarship, in academics, in even serious research papers, the word Asian has been used essentially in a very limited context. So the more I looked at it, the less satisfied I was about this concept of South Asia. I agree there is a South Asia. I would use the term India and its neighbors, but now South Asia has become the term to use. So there's no point in trying to change something that is so fixed. But more importantly, India is way beyond that. India, can you call India the pivot of South Asia? Can you call India the pivot of military ruled Pakistan? Can you call India the pivot of Basil Rajapaksa's Sri Lanka? Can you call India the pivot of, let's be honest, Mr. K.P. Oli's Nepal? Can we call India the pivot of Khaleda Zia's Bangladesh, or even, Sheikh Hasina's Bangladesh? It's very difficult. It's very difficult to think of us as a determining factor, for the simple reason that geopolitical issues constrain our ability to ensure a better relationship and a mutually productive relationship with all these countries. Geopolitics can be an enabling factor, it can be a limiting factor. In the case of much of South Asia, unfortunately, whether it's because of whatever the reasons, I'm not going to blame anybody, I'm not going to blame our diplomacy, I'm not going to blame our strategic policy, I'm not going to blame theirs, I'm simply saying, I'm just pointing out a fact of life. That if you look at in some South Asian countries, India is not the dominant force. at least where the policy making level is concerned. Fortunately, it is the strongest force where the broader public are concerned. In Nepal, for example, if you look at the academicians and policymakers and the media in Nepal, there's considerable India bashing. If you look at the people of Nepal, they are much more, if I may say so, much more open to the idea of India and Nepal being brotherly societies. They work in India, our chaps work there. So from that point of view, it's been very difficult for the Chinese in particular, to try and poison the minds of the Nepali non-elites against India. Elites are a limited group of people. And you go even in Pakistan. Frankly, Balochistan, Sindh, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the Pashtun areas, Afghanistan. Indians are regarded extremely, very positively. In fact, I was rather surprised to see that the Grand Mufti in Kabul has basically given a proclamation. You should check this out. I was sent that. I presume I was sent it by a source that is totally reliable, that Pakistan cannot any longer be called a Muslim country. So what does that mean? It's an apostate country. What does that mean? If you're an apostate, there is only one punishment for you. What does that mean? It means the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is perfectly justified in what it is doing. If it is true, and I would request you to, because frankly I have limited time for researching into every bit of information that comes my way, but you can research into that if the Grand Mufti actually said that. If he did say that, it's quite a tectonic change in the approach of Afghanistan, Taliban ruled Afghanistan, towards the reigning elite in Pakistan, which is the Pakistan military. We are seeing evidence of that. I mean, from the very beginning of August 15, 2021, I had mentioned about the fact that you have 6 groups in the Taliban. One group is linked to China, 2 groups are linked to Pakistan, and 3 groups of Free Taliban, linked to neither of them. And almost all of them are Pashtun, by the way. And the Free Taliban are mostly younger people. What I would call the bound Taliban are bound to either China or Pakistan. They are mostly older people. Many of them have had very comfortable lives in Dubai. Some of them, for some reason, even the ones who are bound to China have not settled down in Hong Kong or Macau or China. For some reason, they've settled down elsewhere, mostly in Dubai or the Middle East or something, or in Pakistan. But the Pakistani, they're all older people. The younger people, about 60 to 70% of youngsters in 2021 used to be part of the 3 Free Taliban. And my point was that these guys they are going to grow, and they have grown. Today you can see visibly, the military was delighted when Afghanistan happened. But today's Afghanistan is not Afghanistan of 1996, when the Taliban was brought to power by the United States under Bill Clinton. It's a very different Afghanistan, very different Pashtun community. And may I say that I have immense respect for the Pashtun community. Pashtun men and Pashtun women, I met individuals who are extraordinarily brave, very courageous, and really, amazing people. They're totally different. There's a totally different Taliban today. Unfortunately for the Pakistan military, it did not really get that memo of its difference. And as a consequence, there's been a power shift, which ultimately, I think, is causing a lot of consequences to it, which it did not intend. But again, I want to say once again, coming back to our country, India. And the good thing about India is a lot more than its media. India is a lot more than its, art and culture. If you include Bollywood as culture, you're welcome to include Bollywood as culture, but it is culture. Films are culture, let's be honest. You can't deny it. You may not like the culture, but it's culture. India is more than the central government, more than the state government, more than the opposition parties, more than its businesses, large, small, medium. It's a collective of all these things. So different parts of India interact with different parts of other countries. In the United States, for example, and I've said this multiple times, I don't want to repeat it here, we had a flourishing interaction at the ground level between Indians and Americans. Whether it's Americans who came here, and I would again like to say, that the Green Revolution, the American involvement in that, some of the scientists involved in that, did an amazing job. And I think it's important that we should recognize them in some of our Padma Awards, some of them posthumously, some of them may still be alive, but those scientists who came here, those agronomists who came here, I think they should be recognized by India because they did a tremendous amount for Indian agriculture. But at the higher levels, you had President Johnson saying, I'm not going to give you shiploads of wheat unless you condemn, the North Vietnamese, which we refused to do. Mrs. Gandhi, to her credit, refused to do that. And finally, Johnson was shamed into sending some shiploads. And we used to live literally ship to mouth. It's a big change from now. But at that time, it was literally in the 60s, ship to mouth. But what I'm trying to say, in it, the India-US relationship has grown from the ground up. Like a house is built. You don't build a house with a roof at top, or four spindly pillars pushing it up. You build a roof from the strong foundation and then the superstructure and then finally the roof. So that is the India-US relationship, which is why it's a very strong relationship that can bear geopolitical shocks. The relationship with China had to be top down because it is not possible to have any other kind of relationship in China without the consent of the Communist Party and its top tier. In my case, I've gone to that country multiple times. I would like to say that I have, both me as well as my wife, we have enjoyed our stays in that country. They are wonderful people. But I think every one of my visits has been facilitated by the Communist Party of China. But there is no point going to China unless you have gone through that track. You cannot meet people. You cannot, you have a degree of freedom which is extremely constricted. If you go to Iran, for example, the best track is to be invited to Iran by the Revolutionary Guard. I must confess that I have been to Iran and as the guest of institutions that are connected to the Revolutionary Guard. And as a consequence, you get to know the mind of the policy makers, because that is the function of somebody who's doing geopolitics. The mind of the policy makers. The policy makers may make up their minds as a consequence of stimuli lower down the food chain. They may make up their minds as a consequence of street protests. They may make up their minds as a consequence of electoral opinion. But essentially, you don't have to, that may have an impact on them. But essentially what you're looking at is their mindset. And if you don't go through certain channels, you don't get that mind. In the United States, fortunately, that does not happen. I remember the 1990s, I used to go there, and Mr. Clinton was very adamant that Pakistan belonged to, in de facto, to India, not to India, but to Pakistan, that Kashmir belonged to Pakistan. He sent that Assistant Secretary of State, Robin Raphael, who was viscerally against India for some reason, I don't know why. But he was totally opposed to our nuclear program, and if, as I suspect will happen in the next 3 or 4 years, our fusion program based on thorium succeeds, India will be doing an amazing favor to the whole world, including the United States, through continuing a program that President Clinton worked very hard to throttle and strangle. But I had no problem in the United States. I used to meet, for example, people opposed to Clinton. They were what is called neocons. They were very opposed to Clinton. They were like me. They were people who so-called important people would not meet. You go to India at those days as an Indian academic or whatever, you're treated pretty dismissively. Oh, what's India after all? New Yorkers were treated equally dismissively. So two sets of unemployed people met and we had a lot of chats with each other and we built up a lot of relationships and we built up a lot of understanding of each other's viewpoints, I would say. So the point is you go to the media. Some elements of the media will be hostile to India because they'll be influenced by the White House. Other elements will not be. They'll be friendly to India because the White House is seen as hostile to India. So you have multiple layers in which you can operate, and if door A is shut, door C and B and shut, there'll be door D, E, F, G, H, F. At least 2 or 3 of them will be open, and in a democracy, every one of these doors is important. You know, you can't say in a democracy there's only one door or only 3 or 4 doors. There are multiple doors, and each of them have their own resonance because each of them can influence the top. The question of relevance comes in the question of influencing the top. Every one of them can influence top. In India, for example, corporates can influence the top. Small industry can influence the top. Middle class can influence the top. Hopefully, Finance Minister Sitaraman will give some evidence of that in this budget. I've been pushing for a long time for a raise in exemption limits of income tax, and I think we have an extremely low exemption limit, 2.5 lakhs or something. I think it's extremely low. I hope she raises it. My own view is she should raise it to at least about 6 to 7 I mean, significantly raise it. I hope it happens. I don't know. But the fact is the middle class will reach the policymaker's mind. The lower class, what we call the lower class, will reach the policymaker's mind, and at least this government is doing a lot for that in terms of free food, etc. So the point is, whichever door you enter, don't worry, you have a means of reaching the policymaker's mind if you convince that particular door about the relevance of India and the United States. You go to China, and if it's not a door which is through the Communist Party of China, at least I can assure you, you have very little chance of making an impact on the policymakers unless you try and create, efforts at at trying to make people go against the party. And if you do that, frankly, most people who do that, many of them don't come back. Now, in my case, I've always been anxious to come back. Much as I like a foreign country, the happiest moment of my trip is always when I board the flight back. The happiest moment, is when I board the flight back. So I was in no hurry to be in China for a long length of time as a state guest with food and board looked after and just a little bit of a small area to go pacing around in. So the point is, therefore, I am again going into a mindset. And in my view, the mindset that we should have as geopolitical specialists in India is no longer to look at India from the prism of South Asia, but to look at India from the prism of Southern Asia. This is what is my view on the matter. The G20 process of which India is the presidency, the Prime Minister is very clear that India has got to showcase the G20 to the people of India and showcase India to the G20, a very significant group of people. And that is happening through government and private sector organizations. There's something called T20, Think 20, and which is supposed to be doing the planning for a lot of the processes of the G20. And you have an Indian, in all the different countries, India, Germany, Indonesia, all these different, Saudi Arabia, the members of G20 are part of it. The Observer Research Foundation, ORF, is the, if I may say so, the facilitating agency for that. So the MEA has said, all right, you take it over. MEA has given the facilitation to something else. So the point is, it's an active public-private partnership, And it's the active participation. If you look at the people who have been chosen in all these fields as, to man these particular verticals, more than 3/4 of them are outside the government, which I think is an extremely welcome sign. And as much of, I would say among them, several are individuals who have fairly original ideas of thinking. They're not individuals who think that the change in thought means a change in the package. A change in thought means you can have the same package, but something different inside. I would prefer to have a different insight and the same packaging. You pretend that nothing has changed, then pretend that a lot has changed and have the same thing dished out, which has been going on for a long time. I think the first is more valuable for the people. So that is where I went into this concept of Southern Asia. Yes, we are a pivot, but we are not just the pivot of South Asia. We are, in fact, in many countries from the leadership structure, we are not even the pivot. But the fact is that we are relevant in South Asia. We are, without a good relationship with India, no South Asian country can develop. That includes Pakistan, which is entering into a meltdown, a self-created meltdown, because it is having a policy of obsessive animosity towards India. Any South Asian country that has a policy of obsessive animosity to India will face huge headwinds in its progress. It makes sense to be friendly to India. No other country can substitute. Chinese may be very friendly, Americans may be very friendly, the Turkish may be very friendly, and incidentally, it's very interesting if you want to analyze the foreign policy of a country, look at its national broadcaster, TRT. I would invite you to look at Turkish television. If you look at the programs on India, the BBC, they've published a lot of nonsense in those two documentaries. And Sunday Guardian, the next day after tomorrow, is going to give the horoscopes of many of the people behind that and their linkages. So I think you'll understand, you'll be able to connect the dots. But TRT about India, a country that produces cough syrup that kills people and all that. But Pakistan, basically a wonderful country. It's progressing. It's doing very well. If you look at TRT, you visit Pakistan, you'll be surprised as to what country. But it's a very, if I use an American word, slick. TRT is a very slickly produced band of shows. Very good quality, very good, in presenting its point of views, but it's very clear that President Erdogan does not like India and he loves Pakistan. It's very, very clear. Al Jazeera today has been so much invaded by people from the NATO countries that they have some kind of a split personality. They were there as the voice of the Arab world. Now they are the voice not even of Arabs who have settled in Europe, but they are the voice of Europe. And I think I give full marks to all these Western presenters and other people who are now proudly working in Al Jazeera. They've done a fantastic job of basically, diluting Al Jazeera's initial USP, which was to understand the mind of the Middle East. Now you're the mind of the Middle East to the mind of somebody who is an active supporter of NATO, which I don't think is there in the Middle East. But TRT, even though Turkey is a member of NATO, somehow TRT has escaped that Europeanist influence. It's authentically Erdogan Turkish. I don't know what's going to happen in this election to him. Some people believe he should come back to power. Some people believe he should not come back to power. If you check my writings, I think you'll know exactly which side I'm on. But it reflects Erdogan's Turkey. So, so please, watching television is not just a sport. It's not entertainment. It's not even accumulation of knowledge. It's an interesting insight into policymakers, especially when you watch state-controlled channels. Now, the BBC is a channel controlled by a section of political opinion, represented very ably by the Labour Party. And some of the motivation behind this is not so much an attack on Narendra Modi as it is an attack on Rishi Sunak. I think there are people in the BJP, who are missing it and saying it's an attack on India. Essentially, it's an attack on Rishi Sunak. There are people in Britain, very liberal people, who are not racist at all according to, who don't believe in these things, who love everybody, but they are boiling inside that you have somebody from this wretched country, and that too from a particular community that, that is portrayed in some parts of the media as a community of fanatics that go and do all kinds of horrible things to people. This kind of a man is now Prime Minister of our country. It must be unbearable. And and as a consequence, you have that particular, look, Rishi Sunak is an Indian. Rishi Sunak comes from a particular religion. And if you trash India and you trash people of that religion, it has an impact on Rishi Sunak. It has what's called a knockdown effect on Rishi Sunak. So please, I would say the target of the BJP is now entirely the BBC, and it's forgetting the domestic politics in the BBC, and in that domestic politics, having a Sunak as Prime Minister is horrible. You always got to have a proper gentleman from the UK, preferably English, to basically tell the natives what to do and to basically educate them as to what needs to be done. And you can't have one of these people come there. It's horrible. It's unbearable. But anyway, let's expose the country. Let's expose this religion. And let me say one thing. I am coming from a genre where I frankly do not believe religion should obtrude anywhere in public space. I believe in what the French call laïcité, a complete separation of religion from politics and the state. It makes no difference to me what religion you're from. You're a human being. And if I may say so, I have read the holy books of many of the great religions of the world. Certainly, I have read the Holy Quran several times. I have read the I don't think the Bhagavad Gita in that sense, the Vedas and the Upanishads. The Upanishads, I have read that. I have read the Bible. I have tried to go through parts of the other religious texts. The Buddhists don't really have a religious text, but they have got various teachings. And I am convinced that every one of them has the same message, that every one of us are children of the same divine force. You look at the Gayatri Mantra, it's a celebration of divine force. If you look at, the so-called, Abrahamic thing here, you got multiple divine forces. No, you have one central divine force in separate manifestations. That's all. So, I don't want to go into theosophy here, but all I want to say is that, this kind of a situation, this is part of the process of trying to lock India into a very narrow pen and household in which it has never fitted in the very beginning and does not fit now. Now, all said and done, Jawaharlal Nehru had a vision of an India that could make a difference across the world. It's a different matter that what he did to achieve that vision did not succeed. But you cannot deny that he had a vision. He had a global vision for India. And you can see it in his writings, you can see it in his actions. It's a different matter that much of what he did, in fact, was less than helpful to that mission. And that is represented in 1962, when except for Bhutan, no other country supported us. Prime Minister Modi sacrificed a lot of Indian interests to support countries. He worked very hard at getting the support of countries by being helpful to them, and he was intensely helpful. India getting freedom was the catalyst for a lot of countries in Africa getting freedom. A lot of countries in Latin America getting rid of this overlordship of people of a particular ethnicity, overlording it over the other ethnicities. And you're seeing that even now play out. Peru, for example, you have one particular ethnicity, an Andean president, thrown out by a different group that has been in power for a long time. And in my view, that is basically nothing but, it is a clear sign of prejudice and racism. But you have a lot of people in the United States and the Western world who not pretend, they probably believe that they're not racist, who totally support this transition in Peru. who have, why? Because the president has been removed and a better person has come. Who defines that better person? We don't know. I mean, Venezuela, the current chap is popular, like him or not. The guy who challenged him, as soon as he was embraced by the Western world, he was completely finished off. Frankly, it didn't help him very much. And today it's acknowledged that you have to come back to Venezuela. I hope the Americans have some sense and they come back to Venezuela and they lift sanctions. I hope the Europeans have better sense and they withdraw these sanctions on Russia, because we need cheaper oil until India can provide the world with cheap energy. But again, what I want to say, you look at the concept of Southern Asia. I would not like to say my concept, the concept of our Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. It is the concept of our, I want each of you to be thinking about this, and wherever possible, as ambassadors of this concept, I mean, possibly, because it has been evolved within the department, somebody in the department, namely myself. The fact is, look at the Middle East. If you look at it as a table with multiple chairs, you see India having at one time technology. You see the Middle East having resources and capital. You see Southeast Asia having markets. You see some other groups having some other assets. It's a table with multiple legs. For us, I can tell you, the entire table is perfectly workable within Southern Asia. Southern Asia makes as much geopolitical sense to chisel together as the European Union did. The European Union, in my view, makes sense from the point of view of a common market. The problem they have is that they are now going and using their immigration policy on the basis of geography and ethnicity rather than ability. And that has been a huge problem for them. And they have other issues also, other problems in policy. And the other problem is they believe that they are still in a situation where they can, in a sense, guide the world. Now, if you go to the Bhagavad Gita, if I'm not mistaken, again, it's a long time back that I last read it. But I think the last few lines was Lord Krishna telling Arjuna that, look, I have told you all this. This is my view on this. This is my view on that. I've spent a lot of time explaining it to you, but remember one thing, it's your decision. It's for you to agree or disagree with my point of view. And it is for you to act as per what you believe should happen. Because I'm saying it should happen, or you should do this, don't do it. If you believe it, you do it. Which is, in my view, a definition of science. Perfect definition of science. And I'm still surprised that it's not taught in curricula. Because it's more than, it's not a religious book. It's a book in terms of mastering a certain amount of intellectual development. You have books across the world that are like that. You have the Odyssey as an example of that. You have so many other books like that. But anyway, I'm again not going to go into that. What I want to say quite clearly is that look at the Middle East. And I'm very happy. I mean, I come from Kerala. Frankly, if you're a Malayali and you go to the Middle East, you feel more at home than you may in parts of Kerala. Because there are more Malayalis there than you meet in many parts of Kerala. Some of my Arab friends complain to me that what can we do? We are forced to learn Malayalam. They tell me in a little bit of Malayalam, fortunately even I speak better Malayalam than they do. And I say, why on earth are you learning? They say, what can I do? My driver is from Kerala. My accountant is from Kerala. My manager is from Kerala. My cook is from Kerala. My children's nanny is from Kerala. And they won't learn Arabic. They all insist on speaking only Malayalam. So our whole family has had to learn Malayalam. I mean, this is actually told to me, possibly in humor, but all I want to say is, coming from that state, the Middle East is extremely important for India. Exceptionally important for India. It's in terms of resources, in terms of opportunities, in so many ways, and in terms of historical background, so important for India. Southeast Asia, Under this government, you have cultural diplomacy. You have Cambodia, for example. I have met Cambodian students, and every one of them remind me of their Indian links. Every one of them is proud of the fact that they have their roots in Indian culture. They're so proud of that. So again, I would like to say, it's interesting to see that. And if you look at Southeast Asia, again, it's amazing the extent to which they are linked to India. The extent to which they are completely, transfixed with this idea of India being one of the foundational roots of their own civilization. If that region is not part of a region that's of relevance to us when we are of relevance, what is? You look at, South Asia, obviously relevant to us. You look at Indonesia, very relevant to us. I'm very delighted that, Prime Minister Modi and the Indonesian President have had have a very close relationship with each other. Historically, Indonesia and India from the time of Sukarno and Nehru have had a very good relationship with each other. It's an extremely important country. It's it's a key in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN. Just as Singapore is, for example, in Malaysia, where again we have the best of relations. So for us, I would say, the area of our activity is not South Asia so much as it is Southern Asia. That entire stretch of land that goes from ASEAN to the GCC countries. Central Asia, in my view, I don't know whether it should be included as part of Southern Asia or not. It's something to be worked out. I haven't come to a conclusion on that, but I think definitely Tajikistan and all these countries would, I think, come within my definition of Southern Asia. But certainly, the Middle East, Iran, etc., come within my definition of Southern Asia. Certainly, the ASEAN countries come within my definition of Southern Asia. And which is why I'm saying, when we are thinking about India, let's think of India in the context of Southern Asia. Let's not think only of the concept of South Asia. Let's think of it in the concept of Southern Asia. And if we have that kind of thing, then it just might ensure that we have a better understanding of how important we are as a factor for change throughout the region. It might help us to fashion our diplomacy in a way that we give priority to Southern Asia. A lot of priority is taken up with South Asia. Excellent, there's nothing wrong in that. It's a great thing. But we need to give, if I may say so, a lot of that oxygen could also be spent on Southern Asia. This is the point we were trying to make, and this is the point I want to say today to you, because I find, wherever I go, I find our ex-students. Recently, we had a conference in Delhi involving what's called the T20, and there was a think tank from Cochin, and lo and behold, that think tank got people from our department. So across the world almost, you are seeing people from our department. I've got people coming up to me, and I sometimes it was they were there 7, 8 years ago, sometimes even longer, and and it's a very pleasant surprise to see that. So this is the nursery of, if I would like to say, thinking which is original and which meets the needs of the times. We are not thinking about new labels. We are not thinking about new packaging. We are thinking of concepts that fit the needs of the times. And in that context, I'd like to say, it's very important for us. This is the 21st century. Essentially, it's your century. You're going to spend all your lives in a century. With the help of medical science, I think you'll live to see the century change. Some of us may not make it, but you are definitely more or less likely to make it. And from that point of view, let's start thinking not of South Asia anymore, but of Southern Asia. And very importantly, let's start thinking in terms that, we don't have a prejudice about any country in South Asia, Southern Asia, or anything of the kind on grounds let's not use politics and religion to divide us. Politics and religion are important, but they should be, religion is something internal, politics is something for empowerment, it's not meant for division. So we have to be very careful when we approach this whole thing. And this is, I'd like to just say, to end this by saying that there is something called a T20. Now, for some odd reason, I've been made the co-chair for India of the T20. And we had a meeting in Delhi of the other T20 members. And I've got 240 abstracts to work through. I have requested, help from Dr. Anand and others. I lean a lot on this department for a lot of help. And I must confess, I'm grateful to, to people for doing that. But I said one thing to them. When you're analyzing these abstracts, please don't, each of us have got country biases. Each of us have got personal biases. Each of us have got regional biases. Let's try and look at it from a T20 point of view. Let's wear our T20 hat. And each of us think of us as a T20 collective. And try and keep these biases to one side. So if I come across some argument that I personally don't think very much of, in terms of my view on the region, in terms of my view on the country, or in terms of my view as an individual, still, if it's a worthwhile, interesting idea, I think it needs to be given a tick mark. So that's exactly the point that I'm trying to say, that please understand one thing. The country that, the world that we are living in is not a world of boundaries. From the time of the internet, the boundaryless world is moving to become the norm. And if we keep intellectual boundaries, if we keep societal boundaries, if we keep other kind of boundaries, we are not empowering ourselves, we are diminishing ourselves. So just with that final thing I'd like to say, start thinking Southern Asia from now on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nalapat, for that very inspiring speech. And there is a lot of food for thought in your arguments. And we will certainly be thinking more and writing more on this particular theme on Southern Asia and how India can play a significant role in the geopolitics of this particular region.
And don't forget the inception.
Sure. Sir,
inception is from our department.
Yes. Sir, will you be able to take a few questions from the students?
Yeah, sure, no problem. It's just 12:15, right? No problem. Go ahead.
Okay. Please ask if you have any questions. Please feel free to ask Professor Nalapat. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Gajjala Shivakumar from Pondicherry University, from the Department of Politics and International Relations.
Good. So you've got a great university.
And sir, what should be the policy of India? Because as you said, it should be Southern Asia. And the Southern Asia, as you have said, it should be from ASEAN to GCC. So the idea of Indo-Pacific is also growing prominence in the recent years. And USA, Europe, and even the Middle East also released their ideology towards the strategies in the Indo-Pacific region. And what should be the India's foreign policy towards the Asian countries? Because China is the main contender in this region, and China is going through its expansionist policies in Southern Asia. That's it.
Yeah, I'd like to say again that I again repeat that we should have an all of India approach in terms of developing educational links, in terms of people-to-people links, in terms of cultural links, in terms of companies coming together. We should look at a kind of a common mind, market in the sense, and a desire to work together, learning from the European Union. The European Union, all said and done, there are some issues in it, but there are also some great successes in it. And we should look at it from that point. We have frequently talked about South Asia evolving as an European Union. No. Southern Asia can evolve as not a European Union as such, but a European, a kind of a Southern Asian federation. We have a South Asia Federation. Why not a Southern Asia Federation? So I think from that point of view, as far as India's policy is concerned, we need to spend a considerable amount of time on these countries. The second point is the problem which you mentioned about Britain and all that. The problem with some of these countries on both sides of the Atlantic, they would like to essentially mold other countries' policies to fit their ideas of what the policy should be or what the policy should be for them. One of the good concepts that you got from, which keep getting repeated in China, although unfortunately President Xi doesn't follow it, is win-win. You have to have a process in which both sides go away happy. Otherwise, it's not a sustainable process. So, for example, you have an exchange. At least it should be 60-40. Okay, I give you 60, but you give me back 40. It can't be 10-90 or even 30-70. So the problem with the European, you must, as Minister Jaishankar correctly said, Europe believes that its problems are the world's problems, and the world's problems are not Europe's problems. This doesn't work. The world's problems are the world's problems, and everybody in the world. Europe is not some continent floating in space or the Atlanticist world. And number one. Number two, United States. There are people in the United States who, in very high positions, 90% of their international travel has been to Europe. If you look at their travel over the last 20 years, forget about from the time they were children or whatever, they may have gone hiking somewhere. It's entirely transatlantic. For them, Europe is the world. The fact is, today, trade with Asia is 3 times more than with Europe. Asia is 3 times more important to American jobs than Europe. Very much more important American technology. Without Indian scientists, quite frankly, and Indian IT professionals, a lot of the tech sector in the United States will be a severe problem. We're not talking about the health sector in Britain. And Indian pharma, for example. The Europeans and the Americans have been saying nasty things about Indian pharma, and it is true. There are issues with Indian pharma. For one thing, I still can't understand why the Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers is in charge of the pharmaceutical industry. It should be the Ministry of Health. Because the reality is that there are some black sheep who have, who somehow managed to escape. And why? Because in India, doctors are very careful. They know. Let's say, for example, brand X. The Indian doctor knows brand X is useless. But the difficulty is there is no bar on that company exporting brand X to a market outside India, which probably doesn't maintain high quality standards. And as a consequence, terrible things happen. I think anything that our doctors, again, I would like to say, not, that's why I would like the Ministry of Health to take charge of the entire pharmaceutical industry. The Indian authorities or the Indian doctors who should basically be the key elements in deciding which drugs are good or bad, because they're the ones in the field. If they decide a drug is bad for Indians, it should be banned from export. That's a loophole that some unscrupulous individuals in India who have produced companies, they don't sell in India, they export. And they give the entire pharma industry in India a very bad name. So that is, but given that, you cannot solve the American health problem without Indian pharma. George Bush understood that and managed to work out a solution to the AIDS problem in Africa with Indian pharma. He realized he couldn't afford American pharma. He went to India, did it, and now Indian pharma has made sure that AIDS is no longer a killer disease. You have Cipla, amazing company, that's done amazing work on generics. And I think Cipla has been very much responsible for this, for what's happened. But at the same time, of course, you've got Big Pharma, which basically gives money to a lot of international organizations. And as a consequence, they try and smother Indian pharma and smother Indian talent. And many times they buy your patent and they don't produce the drug. They buy the patent, make you a rich man, but they don't produce the drug because they don't want that to compete with their much less efficient drugs. So one thing is very clear, the whole of Southern Asia, let's make Southern Asia a zone where pharma is basically sold on the basis of quality and price and reliability, and not on the basis of protecting monopoly interests in particular countries. I mean, it's amazing that WHO is headquartered in Switzerland, in Geneva. Switzerland is the home of big pharma. It's the Rome of big pharma, and you make Switzerland the capital of the WHO. From day one, you're basically handing over the keys to big pharma, which is a major contributor to WHO, by the way, and which is not, it's not surprising that some of the actions and decisions of WHO are a bit odd, to say the least. So I only want to say, let's look, if we look beyond, now we have been focusing so much on South Asia. Even assuming we crack the code and we can drive the Chinese influence out, there are limits to what we can gain from that as an economy, because we're already way beyond all that. Southern Asia, those limits are much broader. For example, the Arab world and India, a partnership of knowledge, technology, resources, capital. They have resources, they have capital. We have knowledge, we have technology. They are now buying extremely costly educational technology from Western countries. They can get that from India at a much less price. That should be encouraged. Our university itself, we have a campus in Dubai that's doing very well, and we have very cordial people-to-people relations with that part of the world. We have very cordial people-to-people relations with ASEAN. So let's take advantage of that. Let's put a lot of the effort behind Southern Asia. In other words, don't think South Asia, think Southern Asia.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, sir. My name is Devansh, and I am second year master student at the department. Sir, my question is regarding India's big brother mentality or the syndrome. How, in the current times, how is this phenomena considered among the South Asian countries?
Look, let me say one thing, that first of all, I defined India as not the same as its officials. Official China is very, very, is a dominant player in Chinese interaction. But in India, all of us are dominant players. Do you have you gone to a South Asian country, other South Asian countries, Nepal and all that? Have you visited them? Yes or no?
No, sir.
Oh God, you should go there. I'm very sure you're not going to be acting like a bully and a big brother. And there was a time when we did act like a bully and a big brother to some parts of the world. Nepal, for example, we had 2 blockades. Both blockades, in my view, were unnecessary. But anyway, but that is government-to-government interaction, G to G. Our difficulty is, in much of our scholarship, we assume relations between countries to be entirely G to G. We study in our reference material, our libraries, when we write our papers, it's all G to G. So the G to G relationship is terrible, so the relationship is terrible. As I told you, the India-US relationship was terrific at different levels, not G to G. Sometimes the G to G relationship can be terrific, but the P2P, the people-to-people relationship can be awful. So I can assure you that if you walk around this country, you do find bullies, you do find efforts to act like a big brother, but overall, in my view, whether it's Indians or Nepalese or Sri Lankans or Pakistanis, I used to write for about more than 15 years for something called the Pakistan Observer, a newspaper, and they were kind enough to carry my writings for all this time. So, for a long time except that now, then the front page became so different from, I mean, from my concept of the geopolitical reality, that it was better that we had an amicable parting, but the people have been enormously friendly. So the question is, and now I can tell you, if any diplomat or anybody else acts like a big brother, I think it's important for social media to call that person out and basically tell him that you can't do that. You know, even if whether you're an American or an Indian or a Russian or a Chinese, if you act like a big brother, let me assure you, you're not a diplomat. You're a failure. So yes, it has been a problem. It is a problem, not only in G2G, but sometimes P2P. But overall, I would like to say, our diplomacy has certainly changed a lot. In the case of Nehru, it was not so much big brother. He genuinely, saw that he could, in a sense, teach the world and train the world on non-alignment and various other things on this entire concept of freedom, liberation, everything. And it was very helpful, if you ask me, in very many ways. But unfortunately, the officials, some people took it as a way that India is in charge, that you do what we want you to do. And obviously there was a problem in that. Today in a household, let's say you have children beyond a certain age and you tell them you have to do exactly like I tell you, I am not very certain that too many of them are going to take you at your word and do what you want them to do. So yes, it has been a problem, but I can say that this characterization of India as being the big brother, and that's why we don't like it, ignores the fact that in many of these people, they have a strong influence of China in terms of working in places connected with China, a strong influence of working with people who are connected with countries whose ruling structures are against India, and therefore they spread the story of the ugly Indian. You have this ugly American concept. There is one particular country that is now regarded as ugly in the African subcontinent, in the continent definitely, even more than the Europeans were regarded as ugly. I'm not going to name that country. But I personally believe, from my knowledge of our people, I don't think that overall we are the ugly Indian. I think we are overall a fairly, welcoming, a very friendly, and if I may say so, a fairly accommodating group of people. There are exceptions, and as I said before, anybody who accepts barriers should go back to the 19th or 18th century. From the 20th century onward, the barriers were completely, off base, and the 21st century, you're a complete misfit. So I think you should head to some cave and remain there. If you have that kind of barrier, everything you see is a barrier, no contact, no this. And let me end by saying one more problem of the social media. The problem is that many people, unfortunately, they look at social media outlets that reflect a thinking that they themselves believe in. Now let's say there are outlets that say Indians are, India is the big brother, big bully. There are many outlets that give that view of India as the big brother and the big bully. If you analyze their behavior, you'll find almost all their browsing is on those outlets. Outlets that deepens an already preconceived notion. So please avoid that. You have to make an effort to get hold of views that are completely different from what you believe in. Totally different. And if you don't do that, you're not doing your job as scientists. We call ourselves social. I wanted to make it an MSc Geopolitics. Unfortunately, central legislation and the central authorities didn't allow that. So we became a masters of, but it is essentially, we are a field of science. So I'd like you to be very clear. Please don't make that mistake of getting deeper and deeper into your own prejudices through just focusing on social media platforms that reflect your point of view. Have a multiplicity of views on the platforms that you access. And again, from that point of view, I'm not really worried about our being a big brother. Those who are a big brother now can very quickly get exposed, and then they can be called out, and I think all of us have a right to do that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Jayanika Chaudhary from Pondicherry University. My question is, yeah. So my question is, as compared to the European Union, SARC has failed. So do you think SARC has failed, and why it has failed to create global influence?
Look, as I said, the point is European Union was a union of countries that, I mean, at one time some of them were way above the others, but generally countries that now are in a sense not as dissimilar as South Asia. When you compare every South Asian country to India, it's totally in a different league and scale altogether. That's a problem. It's like the central, CIS or something. That there's something called after post-Soviet Confederation of Independent States. It was Russia, and then all these little other smaller countries. So the SARC is a bit like that. It's a little disjointed, whereas if you go in for a Southern Asian concept, then that problem doesn't come. And SARC's failure is a failure created entirely by one particular country that has tried to sabotage everything in SARC. Now, India has done the right thing in inviting Pakistan to the SCO. I hope Mr. Bilawal Bhutto will agree to that and come here, because you can't exclude that. Like Joe Biden tried to exclude some countries in Latin America from his summit, with the result that a lot of important countries boycotted. So the fact is that country has been working to sabotage South Asia and essentially to bring a non-South Asian country into South Asia. They want China to be the core of SARC. Now, I have looked at several maps. I can't find out any reason why China is part of South Asia geographically. Maybe the Chinese believe that they are Pakistani, or they are Afghan, or they are, whatever. Maybe in their minds they wake up, they close their eyes and think, oh, we should be Pakistani, we should be, but they're not. They're not South Asia. They don't belong to SARC. They don't belong to Southern Asia. And that's the point I forgot to mention. China is not part of Southern Asia. It's not part of SARC. It's not part of Southern Asia. Absolutely not. It belongs to a different part of Asia, Northern Asia, with Russia, etc. It's not part of Southern Asia at all. So I'd only like to point out that that country has made SARC irrelevant, and that's why now you've got a multiple number of bilateral, trilateral, plurilateral groupings going around SARC. Because SARC meetings, in each meeting, the effort of this particular delegation is to create trouble and to prevent cooperation, and they are among the worst sufferers of that particular policy. Any other question? One final question? Look, firstly, I want to say that I don't know if you're aware of Professor Nandkishore. He is an extremely wonderful guy, and he did a very, very able job in this department. Please convey my warmest regards to him and to his family, and say that he's welcome here at any time. He should come back and give lectures, and that we miss him terribly. Please tell him that. Both of you.
In fact, sir, they are all doing internship at our department, and they have been sent by Nandkishore sir.
Well, he's an amazing chap, and he was my choice for the head of the department. Absolutely brilliant. But then I think he has gone to Pondicherry because whatever and I think he's gone for reasons which are valid from his point of view, from his family point of view. And I also admire him for looking at the entire family. Many of us look only at ourselves and not the entire family when we take decisions. Professor Nandkishore has looked at the entire family when he took a decision. I think that's a very important lesson that each of us needs to know, that we are all part of a family, And when we take a decision, that decision should be reflect to the entire family, rather than just taking a decision to favor ourselves, sometimes at the expense of other members of the family. So please convey my warmest regards to him, both of you.
So thank you, Professor Nalapat, for being here and giving our students your insight about this new geopolitical construct, which should be there and it should be floated and it should become very much important from the perspective of India's foreign and strategic policies. Let's hope and let's also strive towards making this concept more visible. So thank you, sir, once again, and thank you, the audience, students, for being